That looks pretty good. Hello, this is Ken. I like making things. I like making things out of paper, and I like making things cooler. Especially my figures. Sometimes figures don't look all that screen accurate. All they need is a bit of touch up here and there to unleash their hidden potential. I also love using everyday tools and materials to recreate iconic scenes from my figures, so they can shine on my display. Subscribe to my channel and join my DIY adventure as I ask myself the same question every week. Can I make it? Last week, I transformed the not-so-great Icarus figure and made him look a bit more like Richard Madden. Check it out. Today, I'm gonna work on Mr. Knight. I wasn't super interested in this figure, but it just doesn't feel right if I get Moonknight and not Mr. Knight as well. They are made to be displayed together. That said, there are two main reasons why I didn't want to get this. I'm not a huge fan of figures in suits, and the main issue for me is that this figure looks unpainted, at least from promotional images and product shots. But now that I have it in hand, my opinion changed a bit. So, let's deconstruct this figure. There's an FAQ on the paint and brushes I use in the description box below. Being a figure in a white outfit, there really isn't much Hasbro can do, but they did try. At first I thought they used the wrong plastic. That's why the white is so inconsistent. They used 3 different shades of white plastic. This is Hasbro's way to differentiate the different fabric. But I have to say, it's not that effective. At least for me, when I see unpainted white plastic, it just looks unfinished or cheap looking. According to the reference images, its suit is actually very fancy and luxurious. There are all these sequins or some sort of subtle sparkly pattern all over the blazer, so I want to add them back in. The head isn't too bad. It captures Mr. Knight's look quite well. I want to make the eyes glow a bit more though, and add a bit more shading. Actually, I want to add more shading to the overall figure. You may not notice this before, but now that I point it out, you will not be able to unsee this. Because this figure is all white, anything that's dark will stand out. And unfortunately, the darkest area on the figure is the groin area where the hip joints are. And now that I pointed it out, this area is now super distracting. Oh, and one last thing that's annoying is how loose the suit is. It will slide up anytime the legs push against it. It just completely breaks the illusion. I'm not bashing this figure. It has a bit of flaws, but I think I can fix them. So, can I make it? Let's start with the shading. I think a quick black wash could work. But you all know I try to avoid using the color black whenever possible, especially on a figure that's pretty much all white. So I'm gonna mix a light gray and use that instead. I will have more control building up the intensity this way. If I use black and it gets too dark, it's gonna be much more difficult to fix. What I'm doing here is that I'm dabbing the gray onto the suit. I do not want an evenly blended coat of gray. I'm trying to achieve 2 things here. Obviously, I want to add a bit of shading to the areas that have shadows. The other thing I want to do is add a bit of texture to the suit. I'm dabbing the gray all over the suit, and emphasizing on the areas that should be a shade darker. It may be hard to notice on camera, but this is the effect I'm going for. I want the texture to be subtle. The suit should still appear white as a whole, and the texture should only be noticeable when you look at it up close. I also have to be careful not to overdo it, otherwise it'll start looking dirty or muddy. However, I'm gonna add a bit more gray down here at his ankles. I want them to be a bit darker to help ground the figure. And I'm gonna dab a bit of gray onto the mask too, to give it more of that fabric texture. Alright, now that the head is prepped, let's work on the details. More specifically, bringing out the details. If there's one thing that this figure lacks, it's a lack of contrast. I am going to use this darker gray here, but with a damp brush, so I can manipulate and push the paint and fix mistakes. I want to bring out the full texture of the mask, but I'm very nervous about overdoing it. I also want to make his eyes more intense. Bam! Okay, Now the eyes are darker. Let me add the blue glow back. I dip the brush into water to keep the paint runny, and I'm gonna gently dab the eyes with this light blue. Okay. I can kinda see the glow. Let me work on it a bit more off screen. Uh-oh, I overdid it. The eyes look too dark and now he looks like he's crying blue tears. No! What should I do? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the other parts. Maybe the head will make more sense if I apply the same kind of shading onto the body. So let me start with the shading around his collar. This will make the tie stand out a bit more. I'm also gonna do a quick black wash on the tie to bring out the texture, and a bit on the collar. And now let me work on the jacket, adding a bit of shadow to add more depth to the blazer. Gotta blend it out so it looks natural. I'm also applying this dark gray over the areas where each garment intersect or overlap, adding some sort of visual separation to the plastic so they don't look like they're made out of one piece of plastic. Last but not least, I'm going to do a quick wash on the gloves and shoes too, to get rid of that pure white unpainted look. Next, I'm going to brush a tiny bit of this warm white color over the white lapel, the part that's folded, to give it a bit of color so it matches the rest of the blazer. Alright, now to balance out the dark eyes, I need something just as dark somewhere else on the figure. So I'm going to darken the buttons, giving the figure a better dynamic range. Oh, I should have done this first, not after I painted everything. I'm going to split the jacket and the vest. Not the entire way, more like halfway down the torso. That way, when I bend the legs up, the jacket can bend independently, and that should prevent or at least minimize the shifting. Let's see, am I done? No, the suit is still missing that pizzazz. I'm gonna dab a very small amount of gold all over the suit to add a bit of warm glow or glisten to the suit, and a bit more texture. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I worked on the eyes a bit more. I added a bit more white to the center of the eyes. I think that helped a lot. The suit itself is starting to look too busy up close, but it looks just right at a distance. One last thing to touch up, his batons. They're pretty good. I'm just going to do a quick black wash over the symbols so they're more visible. Alright, here's the finished figure. Oh wow, it's night and day. The first thing that jumped out at me are his eyes. They really look like they're glowing. The suit did get a shade darker, and it does look a bit dirtier, but only when compared side by side to the original. On its own, it looks amazing. Look at all the details that are now there on the painted figure. It really makes the original version look so uninteresting. What do you think? Do you like what I've done? Let me know down below. I thought this was going to be a very quick fix, but I ended up doing a lot more than I thought. The reason why I didn't go with a quick black wash over the entire figure is because I didn't want the black paint to get stuck in the seams. Paint tends to like to stick to the edges. If I did a quick black wash, the elbows and knees may become distracting. I also want to emphasize certain areas more than the others, so I went with a more precise and more gradual approach. The texture of the suit looks pretty good in my opinion. I keep thinking it looks a bit messy, but then when I look at the reference images, mine isn't as elaborate or fancy, but I think I captured the gist of the texture. What do you think? Unfortunately, the hip joints still have the darkest shadows on the figure, but the other dark areas of the figure such as the eyes, the collar, the buttons provide a nice counterbalance so the hip joints are less distracting. I'm very happy with the final result. The eyes really look like they're glowing. The cuts on the jacket also helped. I can bend his legs and the jacket stays pretty much in place, but it will move up if I bend the legs more. Alright, let's end this with a photo shoot. Normally, I find figures in suit limiting when it comes to poses, because you can't really bend the torso, move the arms much, or bend the legs forward. But I actually had a lot of fun posing Mr. Knight. I think it's partly due to the character being goofy at times, so we can pull off these poses without looking too silly or serious. One of the issues with suited figures is that the shoulder seams look really odd, but I managed to minimize the gaps here. For example, this pose is alright, but my eyes are drawn to the shoulder immediately. There's like a dark letter C right there. All I have to do is raise this arm a bit, and now the area is no longer an eyesore. So some of you may notice that I rarely do dramatic comic-based poses with my figures. It's partly because I want to avoid paint rub, but the main reason is because I actually have more experience photographing actual people than figures. So I instinctively take photos of my figures as if they're real people instead of comic book characters. It's ingrained in me. With that said, suits are actually very fun to pose. Let me share some of my favorite suit poses. One hand on the jacket, both hands on the jacket. One hand higher and the other hand lower to make it more interesting. Fixing the sleeve. Fixing the cuffs. Look at the camera while posing. Look away from the camera while posing. Another easy one is fixing the tie. These poses are actually quite easy to pull off in real life actually, and they work almost every time. Alright, I hope you enjoyed today's video as much as I did. Give this a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay inspired and I'll see you next week. I can make it, so can you.